Pradeep, I'd like to hear your perspective on the WTO reform. What needs to happen in Geneva? What kind of commitments do you expect from member states? Because as we often hear, the WTO is a member-driven organization, so it's the members that really have an important voice on the WTO. And perhaps, Pradeep, there was a question on trade and environment. Obviously, we should also broaden our perspectives and also acknowledge that there are some often referred to as 21st century trade topics. How can they be included in the WTO's discussion? Pradeep, over to you.
Of course. Well, thank you very much, Axel. And I think some of the conversations that we had in the beginning, and thanks, Axel, for starting that off, particularly in the context of WTO. But before that, let me endorse what Trudy just spoke about AFCFTA. We are working on AFCFTA as well. And what has been forecasted is that the trade levels in Africa would rise by about 3.6% in the context of full integration of AFCFTA takes place. So that's going to be a huge jump. And I think that figure is important to keep in mind. Now, the problem is the question which was raised by a colleague there is something which we have seen happening even within the sub-regional agreements, like ECOWAS, for example. Trading with Nigeria and Ghana itself is a problematic thing. You have border issues which come up purely because of human behavior rather than text or the agreed. So one has to learn from these experiences at the sub-regional level, which will then have to be taken up to the continental level. Otherwise, we'll continue to talk about ideal situations without knowing what has already happened, what is happening, and what can happen. This goes to the larger question, Axel, that in terms of trade, I think tariffs are not so important. Forget Trump for a change. I mean, whatever Trump is doing, he has not been authorized by the Congress as yet. And tariff issues are by and large to be dealt with by the US Congress. Already courts have set aside some of his things, except there are some emergency powers which he is misusing. But overall, what is going to happen in the area of trade are non-tariff barriers. Like the kind I explained within the continent itself, even intercontinentally, non-tariff barriers are going to be the dominant topic. Now, in that context, what can the WTO do? WTO itself, as we stand, has been weakened by the US in particular. If you analyze the cause, Garth rightly raised the question of the appellate body not functioning, with the result that the dispute settlement system, which is the crown in the jewel of the WTO, is now at a standstill. Even between India and US, for example, we settled 6 disputes out of court, pending issues that looks like settle it out. So there are efforts being made to do that, but much debate is already happening. That can we have, if Trump anyway in his first term had settled to walk out of the WTO, he's now stopped funding WTO Secretariat. So can we have a WTO without the US? What people don't understand and misunderstand is that you can still be trading even if you're not in the WTO. Nobody stops you from trading except that you will not follow the rules. US will come back with its own Super 301 and Special 301 and all kinds of non-tariff barriers which people have to deal with. The US is a big market. You can't, nearly most countries depend upon the US for its exports. But if you look at the system itself, as Anne raised this question about WTO reform, this is something which we've been talking for years and years. And every other time, happened about 20 years ago, I was in what was called the Warwick Commission on the Future of Trade, as well as Lami's panel on the future of trade. So we did discuss the issue as to how, if members are not going to comply with the spirited letter of the WTO, do they have the right to stay there? Now, even if you have a veto power, even Benin has a veto power in theory, except that it may not exercise it. There has to be a speaking order. There has to be a discussion, a debate before you allow that veto to be accepted. So either when we do these reforms, then we have to do these systemic reforms also in this, as to how these things will operate. We have a lot of learnings now. And how do we use those learnings in order to ensure that in future we are able to deal with it in a more solvable manner rather than to stay stuck? The dispute settlement system has been stuck for many years now. And as a result, there is a general kind of, what should I say, among the lay community that I know, educated community, who are not people like us who are dealing with policy issues, their thinking is that the WTO is dead. I mean, that is the kind of thinking that prevails in the general public, which is a dangerous thing. And very rightly said that we require a rules-based system. So what do we do? How do we take it forward? I mean, that is a question which has been agitating a very large number of us, and there's a very strong level of discussion going on. The issue is implementation, and in that the G20 has a role. This has happened again and again in all G20 meetings. This has been reiterated. G7 meetings, it has been reiterated that the WTO has to be reinforced rather than to be forgotten. It's a very important, probably the only multilateral organization which has teeth. You want me to stop?
Yes, maybe at the moment, Pradeep.
Thank you.
But just in order to save us some time at the end for a discussion, I think it was very important to highlight the issues that we have at the WTO, but also to highlight the important role of the G20. And I think we'll go into
So one important issue which was raised about this, I think needs a response. This whole move by the European Union to bring in climate-related trade measures, etc., which we think is a neo-colonial exercise. I mean, they have no bloody business to try and even the European business itself is worried about it. And you can't bring in these kind of things when trade is not happening smoothly. Like you want to solve all the climate problems through CBAM or deforestation measures, etc., etc. There is no, I mean, WTO is the right forum to discuss it and to arrive at any conclusion. But the EU is pushing it unilaterally, which I think is something which has to be taken note of. Because you will only, as somebody rightly said, it's going to reduce the competitiveness of the developing world and make it more difficult for them to trade.
Thank you very much, Pradeep, for also highlighting this. For highlighting this point, I mean, there's an ongoing discussion, obviously, how broad the WTO's agenda should be. There are obviously always at least two sides, right? I mean, in the morning or at the beginning of the panel, we heard that there's a demand to also reflect on the relationships between trade and environment, trade and climate, but obviously it could also be perceived as an increasing trade barrier, right? I mean, you even used the term a neo-colonial measure, right? I think we have that's something perhaps we should pick up in the discussion. Obviously, very controversial point here. Let's move back to the panel. 1 minute for each of you. Please feel free to respond to one of those questions and comments. But especially, I won't let you off this panel without one suggestion for the G20. Pradeep, let's start with you. 1 minute.
I'm not going to react to what has been said. I mostly agree with what has been said, and I disagree with what I think is not right. Having said that, one solid recommendation for G20 is to develop a work program with the AU on regional and international trade. Thank you.